Good afternoon, St. Marguerite School. Today's edition of ECTV is coming to you from the chapel. So boys and girls, today I normally do ECTV with you on Fridays, but because it is Holy Week, tomorrow's Good Friday and there's actually no school. So if your moms and dads try and make you do homework tomorrow, you have to listen to them always. And you know how Mrs. Guimont always says about what are you going to choose today? What are you going to choose? That inspiration of choosing kindness came from a story from the Bible. And it's the story that Jesus says, love one another. You know what? That's really our only job on this earth, is to just really make sure we're taking care of one another, and that we love one another and treat one another as we would want to be treated. So I have a story that I'm going to share with you today called Love One Another, and it's the Easter story too. So I'm going to see if I can get a little bit closer here, and I'm going to read this story. Love one another, the last days of Jesus. Jesus was a teacher. He was a wise and good, kind to the poor, the sick, and the outcast. He traveled to the countryside and spoke of God's love and forgiveness. Jesus taught, love your neighbor, both friend and enemy, for in heaven all are loved. Forgive those who wrong you, and you too will be forgiven. Trust in God and love one another. Many who gathered to listen were filled with hope and comfort. Jesus taught, God is always near. Heaven is always around us, even now. We only have to look for it. One day, Jesus and his disciples went into the great city of Jerusalem, and when we entered the gates of the city, people cheered as if he were a king. Jesus went to the holy temple and began to teach, and again he spoke of love. A man asked, which of all the teachings is the greatest? And Jesus answered, love God and love one another. These teachings together are the greatest. And the temple priest grew angry with him and envious. Does he think he is wiser than we are? Does he think he is the king? All week Jesus taught in the temple, and the priests plotted on how to arrest him. One evening, Jesus gathered with his disciples for a meal away from the crowds. I wanted to be with you for one last time, he said. For soon I fear one of you will betray me. The disciples were saddened and alarmed. They each asked, do you mean me? And they wondered which of them could betray their teacher they loved. They did not know, for 30 silver coins, the disciple named Judas had agreed to help the priests to arrest Jesus. Later, Jesus and the disciples went together to the garden. See if you can see that. There we go. Went together to the garden. And only Judas did not follow them. Jesus was greatly saddened. He knew that something terrible would happen, and he asked the disciples to keep watch. But they were too tired and they fell asleep, so Jesus prayed alone. Whatever may come, may God's will be done. Soldiers took a hold of Jesus, for the kiss that had been the sign from Judas was the sign to seize him. The soldiers led Jesus away, but the disciples did not follow. They were afraid that if they did, they too would be captured. Jesus to Pilate, the Roman ruler of the land. Pilate too questioned Jesus. Are you the new king? Jesus answered only, so you are saying. Pilate could find no proof that Jesus had done wrong, but the priests had stirred up the crowds outside. Crucify him, put him to death. Pilate feared the angry crowd, so he let the soldiers take Jesus away. The soldiers brought Jesus to a hill, and they put him on a cross. And Jesus uttered a final prayer. A man who loved Jesus took his body and carefully placed it in a tomb. He rolled the large stone in front of the opening. Then he left to mourn the death of Jesus. 2 days later, another friend of Jesus, a woman named Mary, came to the tomb. The large stone had been rolled away. Mary looked inside the dark opening, and the tomb was empty. She saw a man close by and heard him ask, why are you crying? Someone has taken our dear teacher away. Can you tell me where? Then Mary heard the man call her by name, And suddenly she knew it was Jesus she saw before her. And she heard him say, "Go tell the others what you have seen." Mary followed the disciples where they had been gathering and hiding. "Jesus lives," she exclaimed. But the disciples did not believe her. They were deep in mourning, weeping with grief and remorse, for they knew they had deserted Jesus and that he had died. Suddenly, they saw Jesus there among them, and the disciples were startled and afraid. "Do not be troubled," Jesus said. "Be at peace and know that I am with you always." Then the disciples rejoiced, and their grief was ended, for Jesus had died, and yet he had lived. "Go now," they heard Jesus say. "Teach others as I have taught you. Forgive and love as I have loved you. So you too must love one another." And the disciples were filled with great peace and happiness. For now they understood in their hearts what Jesus had taught. They knew their wrongs were forgiven and that love was greater than hate, greater than even death, and in his love Jesus lived on. Joyously, the disciples set out to bring Jesus' teaching to everyone and to tell the wonderful story of this day, Easter Day, all over the world. So boys and girls, that's the story of love one another and how Jesus taught us that through his example. And even though some of the parts of that story are sad, there's great joy. There's so much joy in knowing that Jesus lives, and he lives in the hearts of each and every one of you. So that's a long ECTV for today. But know that Mrs. Guimau, Mr. Lehman, and all the teachers and all the EAs here at St. Margaret's School are thinking about you still, and that we are so happy to get all the seesaw messages and everything from you. And we hope that you can spend some time this weekend thinking about Jesus and everything that he gave up for us. And we will see you next week on ECTV again. All right, boys and girls, don't forget to choose kindness and have a great Easter weekend.